Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to use Bootstrap to create a landing page for a fictitious startup. Our startup is called Perfect Match. Very funny, I know. It's a human-feline dating app. And I'll leave it up to you to interpret what human-feline dating is. It might be relatively innocuous. It could just be matching shelter cats with lonely humans. Could be something else, I don't know. Let's get started by doing a quick tour of the site. And by tour, I really just mean pointing out a few features. There's not much here. We don't actually have this hooked up. It doesn't do anything yet. So it's really just HTML and CSS, but that's all that we've covered so far. So we have a nav bar, perfect match, home, about, and contact links. They don't actually go anywhere. Sign up and log in on the right side, two little icons there. We get our hamburger. I can click on it. All of those links are now inside that hamburger. Then we have a big background image that stays centered and it covers the entire background. So in the middle, we have the name of our startup, Perfect Match, with 2 R's. And then we have our caption, the only human feline dating app. And then we have a little HR here, horizontal rule, and then a button to get started with an icon. And as I shrink this, it all stays in the middle. And it also moves up a little bit so that we don't have some sort of awkward layout on your mobile device where the text starts halfway down the page. So we move it up a bit and it stays centered. This layout's really easy to do in Bootstrap, but it's relatively effective for a landing page. All that we have is a single column that takes up the entire width. So this column goes 12 units across. We're not dividing it up into any sections, just one column, 12 units across, and then we center everything inside of that column. So let's get started. First thing we need to do is make a file. I have one called index.html. I'll add this in, my regular boilerplate, perfect match. And let's start by adding in Bootstrap. And I'll use a CDN, Bootstrap CDN. Let's do CSS and JavaScript while we're here. We will need that JavaScript for the nav bar. So we need a link tag. Then we'll get the JavaScript. Copy that. And we'll put this down at the bottom, which is a script tag. And then we set source equal to that URL. Now if we open this up, okay, open up the console. We have a small problem, which is that we need jQuery as well in order for the Bootstrap JavaScript. Remember back from the nav bar lesson, we need to require jQuery. So we'll get a CDN for that. We'll do the minified version, copy that URL. Then finally, we go back here and we have to do it before the link to Bootstrap to the JavaScript. Otherwise, it will still not know about jQuery. So it needs to load jQuery first. Now let's try again. If I refresh, okay, we don't see anything, but that's a good sign because we don't see any errors. Let's begin with the text in the middle, all of this content here. So we need to create a container, and then inside the container, we need a row. So div class equals container, and then inside of there, we'll have another div. We always need that row anytime we're using the grid system. And then our div that's going to be class equal to column dash large 12. And that will span all the way across that container. And then inside of there, we're going to have an H1 that will just say perfect match and save. And let's leave it at that. Refresh. And it's not really what we want yet. And that's because there's a few things we need to do. The first is that we need to center everything in that column. So if we inspect what we're dealing with here, you can see that the H1 goes all the way across and we just need to center it inside of that. And the second is that we need to push it down a bit. We need to add some padding or margin so that it doesn't go right to the top of our page. Let's start by adding in the rest of the content. So we also have the only human feline dating app, and that will just be an H3. And we could really play with that. It could be any element that we want, but I'll make it an H3, the only human dash feline dating app. And then we can add in that horizontal rule, which won't look like much, but we'll style it after the fact. And then we'll also add in a button. And the class on that button, if we take a look, This is a Bootstrap button default, and it's a button large. Let's go back. So we need BTN, and then the color, default, and then the size, BTN LG for large. And in here, we'll just add the text, which is get started. And save. Let's see what we end up with. All right, so we have our content now. Next, let's center it inside of the grid, and then we'll focus on the padding and moving it down. But to start, we'll just center it inside this grid. And to make that easier, I'm going to group it all inside of a div so that we don't have to center each thing individually. We don't have to center the H1 and then the H3 and then the button. Rather, we can group it in a div and just center that div with one line. Let's make a div, and I'll give it an ID of content. And then we'll put everything inside of there. So the H1, the H3, the HR, and the button. And we'll properly indent and save. So nothing should look different if I refresh the page. Before we do that, let's add in our style sheet. So I'll add in a link tag, and I'll call my style sheet app.css. It doesn't exist yet, so I need to make it. Save it, app.css, in the same directory. And let's start with something simple like all H1s are purple, just to make sure it works. Okay, let's go back, refresh, and we get a purple H1. Great. So now let's select that div we added with ID of content and center it. So get rid of that, and we need an ID content, and all we need to do is text align center. Let's go back. There we go. So things are center aligned now. Next, we'll push this down a bit, 25% down the page to be exact, with padding equal to 25%. So in here, we'll do padding top, 25%. And rather than giving it a hard number of pixels, if we keep it as a percentage, it's a little bit more responsive. So that's right in the center, and then 25% changes as we resize the screen. Great, now let's add in the background image. So the image that I'm using, this adorable cat and human interaction going on here, is from this Unsplash website, which I introduced in the last video, where we created the Bootstrap image grid. And they have all sorts of really great high quality images that you can use without any issue. And the one that I used is right here. I searched for cat. The link's in the description as well. Here's the URL of this image. Just right click, copy the image URL. Now let's go back, and I'm going to add it to the body as a background image. So background, and then I'm going to give it a URL, which is that giant URL right there. And if we leave it at that, let's format this a little, refresh, we get a gigantic background image. And all we can tell is that this is some sort of startup for fingernails. So we need to resize it. And to do that, we'll use background size and change that to be cover. And if I refresh again, we're getting closer. This will make the image as small as possible while still covering the entire width and height of the screen. So it won't change the aspect ratio, it won't skew the image in any way, but it will stretch in both directions as much as it needs to, but the minimum amount that it needs to fit on our screen. And it's still not perfect, and what we want to do is not change the size of it, but change the position. We're going to center it. Background position, center. Let's save that. We're closer, but it's still not a perfect match as far as the image goes. And those changes will come later. For now, I want to focus on adding in the navbar. And to do that, I'm going to go to the Bootstrap docs and go to components. And I've mentioned this before. I always do this if I'm adding in a Bootstrap navbar. It's just too much stuff to remember otherwise. And I just copy this right here. We'll take the entire nav to start, go back to our app here, and just put it right at the top. This is definitely not the nav that we want, but it contains the pieces that we want. And if I refresh, it's close enough. So there's a few changes we want to make. The first and the easiest one is that our content on the solution is in a container, so it doesn't go all the way to the edges like it does here. So we can go back, and inside our navbar, we just change this to be div class container. And if we go back now, and you can see that because we added in that container, we now have some spacing, just like we do over here on the solution. Now let's get to work on the actual content of the nav. So the easiest thing is to change the brand, which right now just says brand, back in here, this line. Class equals navbar brand, and we'll change it to perfect match and save. Try it out. Okay, good. Now let's get rid of this form. We don't need this at all. So our form all starts right here. Get rid of that entire thing. Refresh. Let's also get rid of the drop down. We don't need that. So that starts right here. This li that ends there. Refresh again. Now we have a single link. So we'll start with these two links, which are supposed to be sign up and log in. That's this link right here. So we can change that one to be sign up and then duplicate it. It's just an li with an anchor tag inside of it. And this one will be log in. Let's check it out. Great. So the icons will come at the end. We have the two links. Now we need 3 links here. We already have 2 of them. And we'll get rid of that drop down. So we need home, about, and contact. So we'll locate that drop down, which is right here. Class equals drop down. Let's get rid of it. And our navbar is simplified a lot. Now we have 2 different links, and I'll actually get rid of both of them and do it from scratch. So we'll add in one li with an anchor tag, and then we'll do that 3 times. This first one should say home. The next one is about, and the last one is contact. Let's check it out. There we go, our 3 links. One minor thing, home is supposed to be active, and in Bootstrap that's really easy. All that we have to do is add class equals active to the li, not the anchor tag, but the parent li. And now we end up with home being the active link. Great. Okay, so that's our navbar, and if we resize, you'll see that we already have this hamburger working just fine. We do have a problem, which is that our background image is messed up. We'll cover that in just a little bit, but we have the hamburger working fine. Everything looks good. Now let's address the font. So the font that I used over here is Lato, L-A-T-O. It's from Google Fonts. So I'll go to Google Fonts and look for Lato, L-A-T-O. There we go. Add to collection. Let's use it. And we'll get normal and bold also, because we want our H1 to be bolded. Okay, and then we'll add this link right into our application. Up top here. Save. Now in our app CSS, we're going to apply that font to everything. So I'm going to select inside the body, font, family is Lato. And let's make sure that it's loading correctly. See what we have. Refresh. And our font changes. It's hard to see because the text is dark, but it changed. You can also see it on the navbar here. It's changed and it matches what we have in the solution.